to start recording. Okay. So I just wanted to welcome both speakers and attendees and hopefully prospective participants to the book launch of the book called Migration and Race, Central and Eastern European Perspectives, and which has been published by Routledge, but on behalf of the Regional Studies Association. Wanted to say that this is it's the Social Policy Research Centre at Middlesex University that is hosting this. And we're a centre that has done a lot of work on migration and is also very much involved in social justice issues, which includes issues of race and racism, and racialization, which is, I think, an extremely important term also that needs to be part of it. And I very much welcome this webinar, seminar, book launch, because I think we're discussing an extremely important topic, one that is very much understudied. And so I welcome everybody to this session. And just to say also, lastly, that the Social Policy Research Centre is celebrating its 35th anniversary this year. And hopefully we can do something related to this maybe in November, because we'll be organising some events in November. So having said that, to welcome everybody, we've got Kasia Narkovic, who will just open up, who's one of the three editors or co-editors of the book.
Thanks so much, Eleanor. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming and to welcome you. I'll just be very brief to say that we are here to discuss.
You want to join or that?
No,
and
you don't have.
No, I do.
People can mute themselves maybe who are participating. That would be great. So as Eleanor said, this is a book co-edited by me, Anna Gawlewicz, and Konrad Pędziwiatr, and it has 7 chapters and also a foreword by Hanna Czerwienkowa, who's with us today, and an epilogue by Ivan Kalmar, who's also with us today. So thanks so much. And all the authors, not all the authors, but representatives of each chapter, because some chapters are multi-authored, are here with us today. So it's really nice because it's the first time all of us are actually coming together. This collaboration started in 2020. We had an event as part of our network during, like in the midst of COVID, and it was an online event. And many of the authors were already there because the idea for the book was sort of born there. And you have kind of followed us through these 5 years, almost 5 years. But some people, like the 2 chapters, one by Kamila and Natalia, and the other one by a bigger group of scholars, Polish Roma scholars, they joined sort of in the last year only, and it was such a smooth inclusion, and they've made such amazing contributions to the books. I'm really grateful. It's been such a nice journey. And I remembered, I was thinking back how long we have collaborated with each other, like Anna and Konrad and me. And I counted that it's actually been 15 years that we've known each other. And, since our PhD days, me and Anna and then Konrad sort of got incorporated somehow as co-author, contributor, and we do things together since. And I remember, I think it was something that I read or somebody told me when I was doing my PhD, that when you find people that you work with well, you just stick to them. So I've stuck to those 2 for 15 years, and I'm really happy that we continue working together, because it's been really such a nice journey with you and with the co-authors. So I hope we can kind of continue to work in the larger group. So before I just briefly say something about the chapters, I just want to say what the sort of point was with the book, or like why we wanted to publish this book. So one aim, there's like 2 bigger aims. So one aim is to contribute some empirical insights to a field that 10 years ago was maybe still questioned, but at this point it's a well-established field of scholarship on race, racism, whiteness, racialization in Central Eastern Europe, and many people in this room have written on this, right? So we wanted to kind of contribute further to these debates of these topics in Central and Eastern Europe, and add these rich empirical insights that also sort of don't shy away from like they are theoretically grounded as well. And the second aim of our book is to further to continue tighten this link between migration scholarship and scholarship on race, which have felt sometimes a bit separate, and especially in Central and Eastern Europe. And I feel like this book does quite a good job of tightening it a little bit more and bringing it closer together. So the 7 chapters, I'll just speak very briefly about them in order. So the first chapter is by Daria Krivonos, and she works on the inclusion and exclusion of Ukrainian labor migrants in Poland against the backdrop of the violence on the Poland-Belarus border. Chapter 2 continues on that topic, and this is our 2 scholar activists, Kamila Fiałkowska, Natalia Judzińska. They draw on their own work as scholar activists on the border as part of their collective or research group called Researchers on the Border. And those who are not familiar with their work, please check it out. They hold these seminars that they held last week. I think every few months they host these seminars like in the close to the border, and they do amazing work. So please look out for their research and the seminars as well, which are always hybrid, I believe. Our third chapter, Szpela Drnowszek-Zorko, she proposes a reading of the post-colonial slogan that we probably all know, "We are here because you were there," and she maps that onto post-socialist biographies of migrants in the West. Then, continuing on the theme of migrants from CE to the West, we got chapter 4 by Irma Budźginaite-Makin and Dominika Blachnicka-Ciacek. So they wrote a chapter that explores the race-class nexus of Lithuanian and Polish migrants in the UK. And then a group really, and we have, I think, 1 or 2 representatives of the group of Polish Roma scholars based, I believe, mainly in Poland. Monika Szewczyk, Sonia Strykacz, Ignacy Jóźwiak, Elżbieta Mirga-Wójtowicz, and lastly, Michał Garapich, and they reflect on shifting racialization of Roma migrants from Poland. Then chapter 6, almost last chapter, is Anna Safuta. She writes about CEE, so Central Eastern European domestic workers in Belgium and Germany. And our last chapter, Milena Błahuta, she stays in the region of Central Eastern Europe and explores transperipheral migrations within the region itself. So that was a very quick run through. And the event today will be basically handing over to the authors to respond to a couple of questions. So I will hand over to my co-editor, Anna, to sort of run you through the questions and take over from here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kasia, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to see so many of you here today. Welcome. So I'd like to stress that this event is really a celebration of massive work, team effort that was undertaken to get this book out there, to get it published. And so the idea today is for the authors, for the contributing authors to speak, to give them voice, and for them to reflect on some of the key cross-cutting themes throughout the entire collection, including race, including racialization, whiteness, and migration from, to, and within Central and Eastern Europe. The event is structured around 2 questions, and both these questions will be addressed by authors. Question 1 is about how race and whiteness feature in each chapter. Question 2 is about key issues, key challenges in migration from, to, and within the region. So what we'll do, we'll first ask the authors to address the first question. This will be followed by a reflection from Ivan, who, as Kasia said, contributed an excellent epilogue to the book. And then we'll move on to question 2, and we'll do the same. So the authors will each address question 2, and then we'll have a reflection from Ivan. So we've asked the authors to speak for roughly 3 minutes. I know it's going to be tricky, but this is to make sure everyone's given the opportunity to reflect on their chapter. And once we've discussed the 2 questions, Professor Eleanor Kaufman will share her thoughts on the book as a discussant, and then we'll have a Q&A at the very end. And for the Q&A, you will have the opportunity to either ask your question in person or via the chat box, which I hope all of you can access now. So without further ado, I will ask our first contributing author, Daria Krivonos, who's contributed the first chapter about the Ukrainian migrants in Poland. So Daria, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you so much, Kasia, Anna, and Konrad, for doing this amazing work on the volume and also for organizing this event. So when working on my chapter, one of the questions that I had in mind was the way in which race came to the region in very explicit ways. Through popular depictions of Ukrainian refugees as white and deserving. Actually, I've been doing work on Ukrainian migration to Poland since 2020, and I arrived to Warsaw even actually during the pandemic. So I could see like a very different perception of Ukrainian nationals at the time. So the aim of my chapter was actually to problematize this dominant binary narrative that depicted Ukrainian refugees as white and deserving in opposition to non-white, non-European asylum seekers. So from critical border research, we already know that borders don't work through rigid inclusion-exclusion binaries. They actually operate through differential inclusion. They are porous. But so is race, which doesn't always work through this like rigid white, non-white binary oppositions. And I think that the position of Ukrainian refugees and actually Ukrainian nationals across different migration statuses, those who arrived before the full-scale invasion, those who were staying in Poland as workers, those who arrived on temporary protection and now stayed in the country. I think the position of these people in Poland actually shows the conditional and temporary inclusion of some Ukrainian nationals as white and deserving, and how whiteness can be processually unmade and remade throughout time. And actually, just here, there are presidential elections going on in Poland, and we already can see the shift and the discussion of Ukrainian nationals as being ungrateful and undeserving. And the candidates across the political spectrum actually can support the cut in family allowance payments to Ukrainian refugees. So already here we can see the shift and actually the precarity and fragility of the initial solidarity responses with Ukrainian refugees. And actually in my chapter, I look into a longer circulation of Ukrainian migrant workers across the border with Poland, and how many Ukrainian refugees that arrived after 2022 again became included in the Polish labor market as precarious, cheapened refugee labor. Actually, I can see that my 3 minutes are now over. I would be happy to talk more, and maybe later we can discuss these questions more. Thank you.
Thank you, Daria. That's excellent, and thank you so much for sticking to time. That was absolutely brilliant, and what an opening chapter to the entire book. Our next speaker is Natalia Judzińska. Natalia, over to you.
Thank you. Actually, today we are present as both authors of our chapter with my dear colleague Kamila Fiałkowska, who is also part of Badaczki, Badacze na Granicy, Researchers on the Border, and we would like to thank all the editors for inviting us to this wonderful idea to participate in this wonderful book. And we wanted, in our chapter, we wanted to focus on the ongoing humanitarian crisis on the Polish-Belarusian border. because as it was said before, the crisis is still ongoing, and even now, like after now we are on a book launch, but our chapter should be also like updated, because here the huge change in the Polish law had happened. I mean the suspending the right to claim asylum on a Polish-Belarusian border. So it is like also important. But we wanted at the beginning to focus on the race, because in our chapter we focus on different perspectives of how the race is created, because according to our research and our research perspectives, also that we are using and adapting methods and some of the categories from the Holocaust studies. For example, we use the term of so-called Aryan side, strona aryjska. So how the whiteness is also created on the Polish-Belarusian border and in post-war, after Second World War, post-war Poland, when the society was seen as a homogeneous society. So the situation, we consider the situation on the Polish-Belarusian border also as a situation that recreated whiteness as something affirmative.
And I was supposed to add something here. And of course, like Natalia said, about this myth of homogeneous Poland, of course, we know that it is a myth. Yeah, it is. The country has never been really fully homogeneous. And just to mention the small but still present Jewish minority, but also Roma minority that other authors write in their chapter, and the feeling that in this particular context, at this particular time, talking about whiteness in Eastern borderlands is actually the very, very peculiar thing, because we never thought about being white in this country as whiteness was something obvious to us. And by various encounters with the uniformed services on the Belarusian border, we learned how whiteness means passing. We learned how whiteness means safety. We learned how whiteness is basically being seen, but also not seen. So you can do certain things which you cannot do as non-white person. And that's, I think, the main message from this chapter regarding the whiteness issue. And I'll also stop here because we are out of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalia and Camilla. This is really excellent and an amazing, very strong chapter, which really sets, the scene for the entire book. I will hand over to Szpela Drnowszek-Zorko now, who will reflect on chapter 3. Szpela, over to you.
Thank you very much, Anna. And thank you to all the editors for, well, first bringing us together all those years ago, and then creating this little community in the making of the book. When I was rereading your introduction, just to prepare for today, I was struck again by how thoughtful and nuanced it was, and how brave it was of you to ask us for contributions and then incorporate them into the introduction while having to do all the work. It was a very comfortable position for us, I think, to be in. So my chapter, as I was reading the introduction, I came across this phrase that the editors used to describe some of the work that the book does, which is to look at racialization and whiteness and how they intersect with and in CEE migrations. And I was thinking about how, in a sense, my chapter flips that around, and it looks at how CEE migrations intersect with and in the field of racialization and whiteness in the UK context. And specifically, how they interact with the post-colonial histories and consequently the post-colonial logics within which the race and migration nexus operates and continues to be constituted in the UK. And by that, I mean that I was also interested in how this discourse of how quote-unquote white, quote-unquote Eastern European migrants were coming to the UK into space that had already been formed through kind of imperial history and the consequently post-colonial migrations that came after. And yet I felt there was a missing emphasis on how migrants from our region were also contributing to how this racialization and meanings of whiteness were changing through their presence and through their participation in also in discourses related to post-colonial migration and post-colonial migrants. So in a way, I wanted to challenge this idea that there is no historical connection between the UK and migration from the Central and East European region. This is very different from saying that it is the same as the colonial historical connection, of course, that has governed a lot of immigration in the post-war era, and also a lot of the racist and anti-racist responses to it. But I wanted to take this phrase, "we are here because you were there," which is commonly attributed to Sivanandan, Sri Lankan-born activist and an academic, but which is also, I think, a rallying cry, and has been a rallying cry for activists in the UK and also across Europe and other places. So this sort of sense of a connection and of a geography of responsibility between places that had colonized or had sort of gone in and restructured peripheries, colonies, and so on, and then wondered why people from those places were coming back to the core. And I look at this from three different perspectives, but mainly through the life stories of two young people from Bulgaria who came to the UK when they were children. And in both cases, they saw themselves very much as post-socialist children, as children of post-socialist transition, as it's often been called. And they very much saw their presence in the UK as a result of a "we are here because you were there" logic. And so the kind of the end of socialism being marked by neoliberal restructuring and the role that Western Europe played in exploiting that the economic differential, and they had various takes and various perspectives on how that relationship put them into conversation or into a sort of position with regard to post-colonial migrants, who they also saw as being in the UK because the British or sort of colonists were there. And then I end with just another perspective on this, which is the idea that in some ways, especially Polish migrants are also in the UK or came to the UK in the post-war era because the British were not there, i.e. not there to save Poland from communism. And I think a little bit about how that sort of take can fill in some historical gaps, but also potentially enable a sort of post-socialist victimhood, which we should all be on the lookout for. I suspect I'm well over time. I've never been good at the elevator pitch, so I'm going to stop there and pass it back. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pella. It's an absolutely brilliant chapter, and thanks so much for contributing. We're really lucky to have you among the contributing authors. Thank you so much. The next speaker is Irma Bukcinate-Mackine, and she will reflect on chapter 4. So Irma, over to you.
Hello, good day, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. I think it's a nice order of chapters that the editors put into, because ours are also, the chapter that we prepared with Dominika also focuses on the UK, but we look in Polish and Lithuanian young migrants in that context, in the Brexit context to be more specific. And at the same time, we were also reflecting what kind of wordings to use. And that was common work among the co-authors and editors. And with Dominika, we chose Eastern Europeans very specifically because that was the label that was thrown at our interviewees in the UK. And that is also a label that both of us had some personal experiences with, that the work allowed us to talk about this as well. And our chapter builds on a larger project, CEU, CEUF, and a larger team. And I see it as a continuation of the conversations we started in other publications. So we looked how Poles and Lithuanians were positioning as good migrants against the bad migrants or bad locals in the UK. And then how they were, in what kind of ways they were racialized and racializing others, and their position in this continuum, how white they feel or are perceived, depended partly on the resources that they had, linguistic resources, socioeconomic capital, cultural capital, and so on. So in this chapter, we zoomed in on intersection of whiteness and class. And bringing it to the center, we looked at the past legacies that Poles and Lithuanians bring with them as well in the UK context, where they have to confront discourses around class and their positioning as labor migrants and so on. That context comes strongly, but also reflect on the silences that is constantly present in our region on the class, at least in Lithuania and UK, Lithuania and Poland, where this kind of even word is hard to use. And many of our interviewees switched to English when speaking about their position, naturally referring, so I'm middle class. And this positioning themselves as middle class was a constant theme throughout, regardless where they could be placed depending on their job position, earnings, and sector they were working on. So this became kind of a way to claim whiteness. And we look in economic and other markers and how they sort them out in their narratives. So my time is up. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Irma. It's a fascinating chapter and a fantastic contribution to wider debates in the book. So thank you again. Let's move on to chapter 5, and Ignacy Jóźwiak will reflect on a team-produced chapter 5. Ignacy, over to you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, none of our co-authors could attend today, so I'm kind of forced to speak on behalf of all of us. I can also mention that Kamila, who is the author of the second chapter, didn't participate in writing our chapter, but she worked with us in the project and in this research. So at the Q&A, maybe she might also contribute with some of her remarks. But going back to the original question, I believe that working on Romani issues and working with Romani scholars and cooperating or collaborating with Romani communities is kind of implies racialization and critical reflection on race. And this is something which during our research about migration, first about migration of the Polish Roma abroad, mainly to Germany and to the UK, popped out. Now we are kind of continuing the similar dilemmas and issues, studying the migration of Ukrainian Roma abroad and within Ukraine. So in this very chapter that we are discussing now, we zoom into experiences of the Polish Roma in the UK and to the experiences of Polish Roma who live or used to live in the UK, but also had some kind of encounters, not always pleasant, in Poland. So we pay attention to what has already been mentioned by other speakers, to this kind of distinction between different groups of migrants and perception of, like, deservingness, being a good migrant or whatever. Here we also touch the issue of apart from being, like, a proper EU migrant, we also touch upon the issue who is actually Polish, who is Polish migrant, and what we explicitly describe in our chapter is also like this ideas and experiences of our interviewees about blending in with the more heterogeneous, diverse social environments in the UK, but still like this kind of threat of being labeled in the UK as being Polish in a negative way, or being described with some, race-related slurs. So this kind of threat is still there, and it can be also encountered back in Poland. So this is more or less it. I'm speaking 3 minutes. I've been speaking 3 minutes, 33 seconds. So that will be it for this round. Thank you.
Thank you, Ignaz, and thank you for, sticking to the time and for representing the entire team. Brilliant chapter. We would very much recommend checking it out, as all the chapters in the book. But let's move on. Chapter 6 is a contribution from Anna Safuta. Anna, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. So I approached my point of departure in this chapter was a bit different. I wanted to examine legacies of colonialism and imperialism in relations between domestic workers from Central and Eastern Europe and their employers in Belgium and Germany. And that was my point of departure, and race and racialization, whiteness plays a role in this. First and foremost, because for Polish domestic workers in Germany, and to a lesser extent also those working in Belgium, when there's a conflict, when they feel exploited, they always have in the back of their mind, they have history in the back of their mind. The historical narratives they know from school, from politics, from their parents, grandparents, their grandparents, oftentimes, and they often ask themselves, is the conflict here, it's what's happening here, reproducing those dynamics I know I've heard about the past. Those people are treating me badly, like they treated my people badly before me in the past. And some workers choose to reject those narratives, but others use it to draw boundaries, to exercise agency, to claim fair treatment in the name of addressing historical injustice. And whiteness is used here as an argument to claim fair treatment. You should treat me better because I am European, because I am white. So Belgian employers of domestic workers, especially older generations, but not only those, Belgian employers have to contend with the fact that there is a blueprint of how to treat domestic workers that dates back to Belgian colonization of the Congos, and the ways that Belgian colonists treated Congolese domestic servants. And whiteness also plays a role here, as employers constantly compare domestic workers, first and foremost using the categories of nationality and ethnicity. And in those comparisons, Polish and Romanian, so white, the white domestic workers in Belgium are presented as safe, representing a safe, a comfortable kind of alterity, as opposed to workers, for example, from sub-Saharan Africa or from Arab origin. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Another hugely important contribution to the book. Thank you so much. And finally, last but not least, chapter 7, the last empirical chapter in the book by Milena Błachuta. Milena, over to you.
Hi, everyone. It's very good to see everyone again. So in my chapter, I'm looking at the questions of whiteness from yet another angle, which is, examining mobilities not to or from the CE, but within the CE. And namely, I'm studying the migration of young people from Poland to 4 countries of the region that we call CEE here in this book. And these were Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. So I applied the category of whiteness to analyze the material I've gathered, of course, as not limited to physical appearance, but as a specific set of privileges and a socially constructed category. And what I'm trying to show in my chapter is how the nature of this privilege is relational, and it can demonstrate even within an individual biography. So I am referring to the concept of peripheral whiteness as well. However, I'm showing how in the setting that I'm studying, so the choice of CEE as a place of immigration for the Polish migrants, their whiteness is not seen as a peripheral. It's actually this intersection of their economic status, socioeconomic status, and their ethnicity. It does not challenge their status in these destinations, and actually on the contrary, for some of the migrants, this choice could be a pathway to a validation, and this is especially the case of these countries that people perceived as less developed. It was also very interesting to follow what does it mean that the country is developed for the people I interviewed. But still this peripheral whiteness was an important point of reference for my interviewers, but as a contrast to their current status, right? So it was painted as their either experienced or imagined identity, this being Polish migrant in the West, and then contrasted, shown how it has a very different meaning than being a Polish migrant in the East, which was also a very relative category, I would say, and it's what I'm trying to show in the chapter. And finally, important to mention was this clear division in these narratives between the European migrants, which my interviewers, they felt really fully white European migrants in the specific setting, and the migrants from the so-called third countries, which then were exposed to these discourses of this anti-migrant discourses. So you can also trace this gradation of desirability in these countries of immigration that they study as perceived by the Polish migrants there. However, they could feel that in this specific location, because of their intersecting identities, they were not a part of this anti-migration discourse. And that's 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Milena. So yet another fantastic contribution to the book and yet another perspective. Migrants from Central and Eastern Europe to other places in Central and Eastern Europe, which has been rarely looked at. So another strong contribution. I will now move on to Ivan. Ivan, would you be keen to share? I know it's a very difficult task given all 7 chapters, but would you be keen to share your thoughts, perhaps some cross-cutting thoughts, wider thoughts on the book?
Oh, well, my wide thought on the book is that it's an incredible contribution at this time to the small but growing and even burgeoning study of race as racialization as it relates to what's called Central and Eastern Europe. And in my epilogue, I'm in my epilogue and also in my remarks today, I'm not able to give justice to each of these amazing contributions. So I have developed in the epilogue a reflection on some of the theoretical and practical challenges that come out of the various amazing examples of the study of this topic. To me, and I was also asked to speak only 3 minutes, so I'm going to rush through it. To me, the issue at the broadest level is racialization, and I like to situate it in the larger context of racial capitalism. And racial capitalism, to simplify a little bit, I see as creating core periphery relationships of various kinds. They're kind of nesting core periphery relationships. And the largest and most familiar one, of course, is that between the global Western, I should say, really center of capital accumulation during colonialism and the colonies where capital was extracted from. And it's become fairly common to situate the post-socialist regions of the European Union and perhaps larger Eastern Europe as a semi-periphery, so that, you know, we often use the phrase it's in between that core and that colonial periphery. But the first point I'd like to stress in my epilogue is that I don't believe that Central Eastern Europe is halfway. It's part of the core. Okay, so that raises the issue of racialization within the core, is I think the way that we should look at it, not only semi-periphery, which is a very productive concept, but semi-core, okay, a semi-core. So then that takes us to the second point, in that if we are speaking of racism towards, I'm just going to say Eastern Europeans. I don't like the phrase, but that's the common phrase, the street, as opposed to academic phrase. So if we speak about racializing Eastern Europeans, that racialization doesn't have the same material underpinning. It does have the same material underpinning, as some of the articles showed, as the colonized core periphery relationship. But when we look at racializing other Eastern Europeans, in other words, Eastern Europeans racializing Eastern Europeans, as we've seen in several of the chapters, starting with the first one by Daria. So now we don't have the kind of economic underpinning, material underpinning of racial capitalism, othering Eastern Europeans by Eastern Europeans, because we cannot argue that, for example, Ukraine has the same relationship to Poland as post-1989 Eastern Europe has to the UK, or as the former colonies have to the UK. So I like to distinguish between the primary racialization and then the secondary racialization, which is a racialization undertaken by those who have been racialized, if I can explain this briefly. People who have been othered and who feel insecure about their whiteness and transferring that insecurity to another target. I call that secondary racialization. And this, like racialization in general, has a lot to do with class. So that here we see that situation that was mentioned, where people use class to compete for whiteness. More generally, we see a framework in which people compete for whiteness in the secondary racialization. I would use a phrase to describe all this: white racism that others other whites. Now that applies to almost every chapter, but not perhaps the one about Roma so much. It's food for thought. I think it applies to migrants from Eastern Europe to the West, as well as it applies to migration from Eastern Europe to Eastern Europe. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivan, for your summary of your thoughts in the book. It's as Kasia mentioned, this cooperation, this book is a result of a very long process of cooperation. And it's kind of a normal thing that there's always a time lapse between the moment of conceiving, running, and writing up research and the actual publication. And this is precisely what happened here. But at the same time, I believe this book is super timely, and it already was mentioned by Daria, for example. And we are basically in Poland between the first and the second round of presidential elections, when during these elections we've seen the racializations of various groups of migrants being super prominent, and actually, and what is very interesting as well is super good results of the candidates who are openly expressing racist remarks and thoughts and ideas, not only within the Polish society, but within the larger Polish diaspora. So as we see the results of the first round of elections, almost every third poll in the diaspora voted for either Mensen or Brown, which is super interesting, and it shows that our efforts of reflecting on the process of racialization of migration are so important and as they never been, I would say. So I would like to now move to the second round of our questions to all the authors and also to Ivan. And this question is exactly how what is the key issue challenge in migration from to within the region now? So we understand that there's a very important time lapse between the moment when you were writing your research, and it would be great if you could express your thoughts how your work is in a way reflecting the current situation. And I would like to give the floor first to Daria.
Yes, thank you, Konrad. So in my 3 minutes contribution, I would like to just say how EU's eastern borders are increasingly coming to the forefront of EU migration governance. We see how border walls are being built across many countries in the region. And of course, it happens after many decades of EU and Frontex in militarizing other and sealing other borders of the EU. That's why, of course, the opening of new routes to the EU shouldn't come as a surprise. So, and I think that this role of the region actually I think that it should make us rethink the way we think of the region. And one of the dominant discussions through which the region has been depicted is this post-colonial and post-socialist discussion, the connections between post-colonialism and post-socialism, with which I also engaged a lot. But one of the dominant kind of discourses there is that the region is being kind of secondary Europe. It's Europe's incomplete self. But I think, like, from the perspective of people trying to reach the EU through the border walls being built in the east, from this perspective, we can see how Central and Eastern Europe is actually primary Europe, and they become the primary border guards of the European Union. And for example, in case of Poland and other accession states, the capacity for the effective border control was the vital criteria for the admission into the EU member states. So I think that the developments in migration, and especially in the EU borders and through this like very material consequences, and there's the suspension of the right to seek asylum, I think that it should also make us rethink how we see the relations between the core and the periphery, as Ivan was also saying. and also actually take more seriously the role of the region in Europe, in the reproduction of Europe's politics of coloniality and race.
Thank you very much, Daya. It's very important what you mentioned, this element of core and periphery and Central and Eastern Europe being very sort of central in that regard. But at the same time, super interestingly, the Migration Pact and its elements of solidarity, which is in a way putting the share of responsibilities to other countries, is very strongly contested in the region. So it is, which is one of the very interesting things which we can debate later on as well in the Q&A, like how is it possible that something that is in a way designed for Central and Eastern Europe to put away the burden is being contested. So now I want to move to Natalia to share her thoughts on how, what from her perspective are, what are the key issues, challenges in migration from to within the region now, and reflect in a way on her contribution and how it is relevant now.
Thank you, Konrad. And again, this time we'll share our voice, like on our chapter with Kamila Fiałkowska. And actually, I want to, and we want to continue what just Daria said and what Daria referred to. And actually, I've got a very nice impression that we are just continuing our conversations from a few days ago, because with Kamila and Daria and many other scholars, we have this great opportunity to meet in a border area of Polish-Belarusian border together on the Badaczki and Badacze na granicy seminar, Researchers on the Border seminar. So I also treat this as a continuation of our conversation. So it's very nice that we can just move on. And the situation and the struggles and the challenges in migration, the question you asked, Konrad. So first, I want to point out that the humanitarian crisis on the Polish-Belarusian border is still ongoing. Like every day, people are crossing, and actually, few days before the seminar, and so the bit more than 1 week before our today's meeting, I have an opportunity to meet a group of asylum seekers, of people on the move in the forest who. Actually, it was first time after suspending the right to asylum in Poland, they were aware of the situation. They knew that they need to have another plan. So it is the main challenge, like how the migration governance and what Ivan also point out, the racial capitalism and the border infrastructures works against people on the move. And the other challenge is also like how to mobilize solidarity and how to present our research like in the more democratic way. And Kamila, do you want to jump into? Yeah.
Because that's one of the challenges related to how we talk about our work outside of academia. So how to reach out to other people. I think this is particularly now in the election time in Poland, as you, Konrad, emphasized. It's super important to find ways to talk outside of the bubble, because we very often find out that we talk to people who think alike, and we are staying in the same sort of circles. So that's one of the challenge these days. And one of the maybe a good practice that we also wanted to share with you is our collaborative effort within the Researchers on the Border and under the guidance of Inga Hajdarowicz, who prepared, coordinated an effort to prepare a map, very interactive map, which is now posted on the chat, which you can also use for your educational purposes. And the map was co-created also with people with a migrant background in Poland and with researchers, activists who are present on the border. So adding to what was said, echoing Daria's comment from the very beginning, I think one of the challenges is how to reach out with the message beyond academia also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalia and Camila, and also for pointing out the change from the time when you wrote your chapter, namely the legalization of the pushbacks, even stronger. They've been part of the reality even before this Polish-Belarusian sort of border crisis emerged, as we were analyzing the reception and integration of asylum seekers and refugees yet before like full-scale invasion many years earlier in another project. But now obviously the situation is much more dire, and the crisis is much stronger. And thank you very much for the contribution and for also this reflection on the current situation. And now I want to move to Spela with the same question.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to keep my remarks brief because I agree with everything that's just been said. But I suppose mainly I feel that something that's crystallized for me in the last few years is that we've got to a point where we've talked a lot about the sense of in-betweenness or periphery or semi-periphery or ambiguity with regard to the region. And that's very valuable work. But how and where we take these insights and how and when they become political or contested is, I think, becoming more and more important, and it relates to what was just said, I think, in the following ways. One is that I'm increasingly interested in how people are choosing to stand with others in particular situations. So I would really like also in my own research to challenge myself to think with and alongside activists more than I already do, or people who are making conceptual leaps to build coalitions and build solidarity, especially at a time when it feels like it's almost anachronistic to say, oh, Central and Eastern Europe is uniquely skeptical about migration, or has this attitude towards protecting the border, when within Europe, Italy and the Netherlands are also among the key countries challenging this established norms of asylum and humanitarian response, of course, alongside other countries in CE. But also, I think there are interesting developments happening among diasporas and also activists and coalitions within CE, how sort of queer and feminist and pro-migrant activists are collaborating. And I think that's something that is really, really worthy of study as well. So I'll just finish there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Spela, for your thoughts. And now I wanted to move to Irma and Dominika, if she wants to also share some thoughts on what is the key issue challenge in migration from to within the region they are describing. And obviously here, one of the key elements for me, which is the key question, which you elaborate in your chapter partially, is this issues of racialization, but also, as mentioned earlier, for example, the diaspora in the UK was very strongly supporting this super racist sort of candidates, and it'll be interesting your thoughts on that.
Thank you so much. So I'll speak first before handing over to Irma. I feel like I literally really agree and echo everything that has been said before, starting from Daria. So I'll be very brief. And I think that one of the key worries, threats, horrors that I'm observing and experiencing is the recognition of how the sort of liberal center, the forces that we thought recently as progressive forces, are taking over, hijacking, and are really comfortable with this anti-migration, extremist, radical rhetoric, how racialization of migrants, of asylum seekers has become a mainstream political narrative. And literally, there are almost no political forces, and I'm talking specifically about Poland, but I don't think it's a specifically Polish issue, how this really radical anti-migration, racist views have become mainstream. And to be honest, this is my key question about how do we respond it as academics, where I feel that the recent example of having been invited as team of migration researchers to collaborate in ministerial project of sort of mapping the situation of migrants in Poland, how it has been used and hijacked by political forces in Poland, the so-called progressive forces. And I'm literally wondering how we should act, how we should react, because it's just really lovely to be here in this wonderful bubble of people sharing the horror and working on similar issues. But I'm trying to figure out how we can remain relevant in the context of the debates that in the region, but also in wider Europe, because it has been said already, the suspension of human rights has been somehow widely throughout. So my question really is, like, what do we do? And, what Natalia and Camila raised questions regarding solidarity and resilience, also of us as researchers, is something that is with me very strongly. And maybe also I'll hand over to Irma, because I feel that it has been a bit Polish-centric perspective. So perhaps, Irma, you would like to add something to. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just a brief comment. Maybe it's not a key issue compared to what has been said so far, but a new issue that I think will require to rethink our region. And here I'm referring to significantly increasing migrant population in Lithuania from Central Asian countries. And that requires to deal with some past narratives or imaginaries that were kind of brushed under the rug, and that's the present again. So the new migrant group requires reflecting back on how we dealt with the past and how we were dealing with other groups and how positioned ourselves before and now, because now we are the West in some of the narratives that Central Asian migrants are bringing.
Thank you very much, Dominika and Irma, for your thoughts and for stressing some of the key challenges, namely the central liberal forces embracing anti-immigration and racist sort of agenda, which is, I share with you the thought that it's not just Polish. We see it very strongly now in between the first and second round of the presidential elections, but it's a phenomenon which is experienced also in other parts. So, and obviously a key sort of question, how to be relevant, how academia should sort of respond to it, and very important thoughts on the important increase in the share of, I would say, not only Central Asians, but I'm just in the process of writing a paper with Patrick Kugiel on Asians in Poland, and if we see in terms especially share of generally Asians, the largest groups are the Indians, Vietnamese, Filipino new migrants, but also from Uzbekistan, Central Asia is very much there in the Polish case, and the share of them is very important, high sort of rise. And the key question is obviously the visibility of these types of migrants. But as we could see, and as you were exploring in your research, some of these groups of migrants do not need to be even visible migrants to be racialized. And it's not important at all. But with the new sort of important increase in the number of sort of visible migrants, these issues may only exacerbate in a way. Huh? So I'm passing now to Ignacy to share some of his thoughts on this.
Thank you, Konrad. Thank you, everyone. Well, I will just add, like other speakers did, that I fully agree with what has been already said, which actually leaves me with more thoughts to share than less, but I will try to be more precise than I would like to be. With our research team, we are in a bit different place than we were when writing and submitting the chapter. And so building on both on our contribution and what we are doing now, which is, let me remind you, the Ukrainian Roma among forced migrants and in Poland and Czech Republic and the IDPs in Ukraine. I would again stress this category of deservingness and the implied hierarchies within different groups of migrants and asylum seekers, and also within the kind of, the quote unquote the same group of people on the move. So because we observe, like, this narrative of deservingness can be observed. I think it was there in all our presentation, and like it was said by other speakers, we are observing and actually sensing, feeling it now in Poland with the shifting narratives about Ukrainian citizens in the EU countries. So again, I think that this is not only our research team, but we are all in a bit different place than 2 or 3 years ago. This assumption that, for instance, Ukrainians are more privileged than other refugees, asylum seekers, is not that valid anymore. Which then, brings us to the broader discussions of where we all are in our research and in our interventions or activisms as conscious citizens. But moving a bit further from our particular research, I see a great challenge in the very migration demography and the so-called trends and patterns, as some demographers here in Poland like to call these processes. Some scholars and experts outside of Central Eastern Europe tend to forget that we, like in our countries, there is a growing number of labor migration. In case of Poland, it's not only Ukraine or Belarus, but also Colombia, Philippines, Bangladesh, Pakistan. And I'm not talking about asylum seekers. I'm talking about labor migrants and labor migration as such. So the scale of the phenomenon can be really, it's challenging. It can be also suppressing for us as scholars, as activists, as I don't know, NGO or trade union organizations, because we are dealing really with a great shift in paradigm and in demography. And in a way, with the context of migration from war-torn Ukraine, and in this increased labor migration into Central and Eastern Europe. I think, like, we all need to reflect on the simple binaries between forced and volunteer migration. Of course, the research is there, and there are tons of publications about it, but I find it very particularly important for our regional context. Okay, sorry, it was 5 minutes, but
thanks for counting. Yes, thank you very much, Ignacio, for your thoughts and for also telling us about your current research and how also it builds up on a way on your earlier research. Now I want to move to Anna Safuta and give her the chance to answer this question. Anna?
Yes, thank you very much. When I tried to answer this question then, I thought that what I would like to contribute to answering the question is that I never wanted to do what I never wanted to do, not now and not in 2018 when I first observed and theorized peripheral whiteness, so the existence of a hierarchy within whiteness, is that I never wanted for Eastern Europeans to compete in some kind of oppression Olympics or to claim victimhood on par with people of color. And it's also why I'm often uneasy when some authors talk about racism against Eastern Europeans. I think there should be a clear conceptual distinction between the dynamics of racialization experienced by white Eastern Europeans, sometimes at the hands of other Eastern Europeans, as we have seen here, and the dehumanizing racism experienced by migrants from some regions, such as the one experienced by Swana migrants, both in Western and in Eastern Europe at the moment. What I wanted to do is to show that there are alternatives, epistemological alternatives to the catching up discourse that has been dominating Eastern Europe's relationship with the rest of the world since the 1990s. And nowadays, with the rise of the radical right and illiberal populism in Eastern Europe, this old catching up discourse that before was aimed at catching up with democratic institutions or market institutions, now it manifests explicitly as a kind of competition with the West for who will be the whitest in the discourse of populists, and especially far right populists. And instead, what I'm trying to do with my research is to show that there are alternative ways of fighting racialization, of fighting labor exploitation, which often comes as racialization as peripherally white migrant, instead of kind of complicity with Western hegemonic whiteness. I would like to see solidarity between Eastern Europe and the rest of the world, especially between migrants, and especially with migrants who, as I said, are currently being demonized by policymakers in Eastern Europe and in Western Europe. So basically, I have no magical solution, but I would like at least my research or our research here to contribute to this disinvesting from this whiteness competition that it seems to be going on especially in political discourse in Eastern Europe at the moment.
Thank you very much, Anna, for your very important thoughts. And last but not least, Milena, the author of chapter 7, and her thoughts on the relevance of her work to current situation and current issues, challenges in the region.
Yeah, I must say it's not easy to be the last one to say something after all these brilliant thoughts. But yeah, when I was thinking about how to answer this question, probably I'm biased also by Daria mentioned the presidential campaign in Poland now, but it has been quite overwhelming, and I think also Dominika mentioned this embracing of anti-migrant rhetoric by liberal forces. Maybe I would say that for me it's this building on fears and using the topic of migration for the current politics. And again, I don't think it's something specific for the region, although I know that there are people who like to see Eastern Europeans as racist and anti-migrant. But I think now we can all see that this is a broader process, and not only in the region, and should be seen in a broader context. But I think this, and also normalization of this racialized discourse on migrants, is something that also strikes me. And I was thinking how to refer to my text, my chapter, with this comment. And not to repeat anything that has been said already in this discussion. I think what was interesting for me also to see in some of the interviews I gathered, this referring to the CEE as a safe region, in the contrary to the West, exactly because there are not many migrants yet or refugees. So there was this image of the West that is already not a good place to live, exactly because it's dangerous. So for few people, it was surprising for me, but very interesting that it was a factor to include, when they were choosing the place to migrate, for thinking about the safety of their children, that it's still safe here in these respective countries that they chose. So I said that maybe that I do not support seeing CEE as specifically racist or anti-migrant, but maybe in some cases, for some people, it can be actually seen as positive. But I think it's really dangerous, because this image of this, let's say, last stand of white Europe is somehow also reinforced by some of the political forces, I think, in the whole region. And for me, it's very dangerous, especially that also you mentioned that there are already so many people, so many migrants from all the different places that already live here. And I don't know, I hope these politicians don't think about how this discourse can influence their lives, but I don't know if it's ignorance or not. But that's something that I find specifically dangerous concerning not only the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Milena, for your thoughts and reflection. Now I'd like to invite Ivan to give his thoughts, reflections on what's being said, and or his own sort of perspective of the key issues, challenges in migration from to within the region now. Ivan?
Thank you, Konrad. So much has been said already, and so stimulating and thought-provoking. So, first of all, I feel that the theme of solidarity that has come up is all important. And ideally, we would like to achieve solidarity among people who are othered on racial and other bases of all kinds, and to critique the entire system that has generated the racialization. And here are challenges that the public, not only in the east of the EU, but in the entire broadly Western world, or maybe the whole world, resists the language of race when it's applied to, okay, let me say Europeans resist the language of race when it applies to the continent. And so as scholars, I find it a real challenge to articulate what I'd like to talk about without abandoning the concept of racialization, but also making it understandable to people who find it shockingly irrelevant for various reasons that can be obvious once you look into them. The second point I'd like to make is that I'm focusing here on challenges within the region. So the challenges are going to be those that more Western countries, in part, are going to be those that more Western countries have already experienced. That is the migration of people from outside of Europe, including the former colonies. And this has already increased, and I think it will be increasing in the future. And so countries like Poland or Czech Republic will have, or already are having, issues of migrant absorption that any other Western country has. What I think we haven't talked about, perhaps, or we have, but could talk more about, is the war in Ukraine. And we don't know how that is going to end, but I think it's quite likely that with whatever the ending is, there'll be a further increase in Ukrainian migration. For example, if Ukraine joins the EU, people will have a much simpler path for working in the rest of the European Union. And because Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Czech Republic, Lithuania are near Ukraine, so these places will probably receive even more Ukrainian migrants than today. What's happening with the situation of Ukrainian migrations is almost a laboratory in the generative processes of racial capitalism. So at first, Ukrainian migrants come in and they experience a kind of white racial solidarity that has been explored by some of the authors, which excludes people from Middle East, for example. But once the Ukrainian migrants are in a situation similar to, for example, that of Polish migrants in the UK, then in the UK, in Poland itself, this solidarity, white solidarity, begins to crumble a little bit, and much more so in Hungary or Slovakia. And again, the Russian aspect of things, I think, should be considered, because as this process happens, the othering of Ukrainians is inserted into, in the Slavic-speaking countries, is inserted into a revival of pan-Slavism, which is really ironic because the Ukrainians are Slavs also, but a kind of pro-Russian sentiment is based on pan-Slavism, is used to articulate opposition to the even whiter West in the EU, and can be a cultural or discursive element in the othering of Ukrainian migrants. So those are my thoughts for now.
Thanks so much, Ivan. Before we move on to Q&A, and you might want to reflect on some of the things people are saying, I just want to give the floor to Eleanor, who's our discussant. So Eleanor, please feel free to speak.
I'm not going to speak for the allotted time. I think everybody else wants to, contribute. Some of the things I'm sort of, it's a mixture of having looked at the book and what's been said. But just wanted to say that many congratulations on this wonderful book. It's so much needed. It's so much, I think, contributing to a number of really highly relevant debates around racialization, the connection of racialization with migration, with what's been happening now, and I think very much with the fluidity of a lot of these boundaries that one is talking about. So congratulations to everybody for a very rich book that I think will make its mark. So I just want to make a few points. One, which struck me also as coming through the speakers, was the discussion that we need to have about different histories, because we all have different histories. And I think it was raised, I can't always remember who raised each of the points, but it was raised, I think actually, Anna, you raised it in terms of talking about Polish in Belgium and Polish in Germany. And it struck me, there are a whole series of histories. So, for example, the relationship between a Pole and a German is completely different because they have a totally different history. And the point that I want to also take up from there is one of the things we talk a lot about colonialism, as if that colonialism is extra to Europe, as if the colonial power, the European colonial powers had colonies outside of Europe. But this isn't the reality of our history. The reality is there was intra-European colonialism. There was intra-European racism historically. And I think this needs to be brought back into our whole view of colonialism, that we kind of forget the intra-European colonialism, whether it be between, after all, as been said, we need to look at empire. And Europe had its empires, and they were internal empires. They weren't external empires to Europe. And I think we really need to bring that back in again. And this comes also, if we taking up Ivan's discussion of racial capitalism, I think it's really important there. If we look at the relationship between, if you want to call it periphery, semi-periphery, core, we do have to look at intra-European colonialism, empires, and so we talk about colonialism and we don't talk about empire. If we talked about empire, I think maybe we would, and imperialism more, we would think about Europe in those terms, but I mean internally within those terms. So the internal histories of those empires connects up with the colonialism between European powers and Africa, Asia and Latin America. And I'm just saying, I think that this would help us in thinking about these different histories that are coming out, that, different groups have different historical references. So if you think about the UK, and this comes back to the 2 chapters which included, it's really interesting because, as Robert Miles said, and unfortunately he ceased to be an academic in the late 1980s, the UK never had a sociology of migration because it simply assumed that the colonial relationship was its migration. But of course, let's go back a little bit before the 1950s, and we have a very substantial Eastern European migration in the UK, which is part of its sociology of migration, i.e. we had the displaced persons from the camps, we had the Baltic, men and women from the Baltic, etc. And that was kind of erased from the history. And then if we come back to 2004 and the enlargement, one of the interesting things is that if you look at the discourse of the time, the government wanted Eastern Europeans because these would replace its colonial populations. So I think we do need to look at this also in looking at historically how our own personal histories differ, but how state histories also differ. And this links then with migration policies and what are the strategies of states in relation to migration policies. I just want to suggest that we do look at these histories in a second concept which comes through a lot in the chapters, and I think is a wonderful analysis, is of fluidity. So we have, and particularly we're talking about the fluidity of racialization, because we have tremendous fluidity of racialization. That comes through very much in Ignaz's chapter on the Roma, for example, the way that the Polish Roma in the UK, there's a huge fluidity in relation to how they're positioned by others and how they see themselves. And again, this comes back to a historical, how they position themselves in relation to their position in Poland, and how they position themselves in their position of, let's say, mild racism, and how they play with the different kinds of racializations that they confront. So I think this is another area where it isn't just relevant to the Roma, because again, it comes up, and I think in the chapter with looking at class and racialization. And I think that's a really important element that, again, warrants much greater discussion, rather than to see a group as being a nationality. So you can talk about Ukrainians, but Ukrainians aren't just Ukrainians. Ukrainians are also divided by class and other characteristics. And I think this is really quite significant. So again, I think the third point I wanted to make, following on from this issue of fluidity, was whiteness. And I think the book really contributes massively to the discussion about different forms of whiteness and different, for example, peripheral whiteness, which is really significant, and I think has been the notion of different kinds of whiteness, different degrees of whiteness, the whiteness that is imposed by others on a group, but the whiteness that is desired by the group. And I think there's that tension between the two. And I think this is something which has been brought out. I think on the migration side, and we're discussing here about how academics should respond. And I think this is a really difficult question. But coming back to the use of bordering and border governance and the use of Central and Eastern Europe in order to impose a particular kind of governance by the EU as a criteria of entry. Unfortunately, I think now we've gone beyond border governance, because what's happening in relation to, for example, if we look in Poland, the withdrawal of the right to asylum, which is the next stage up beyond the border governance. We've got the same thing in the UK, which is the threat to take away the right to, not beyond the asylum, but to become a citizen of those who are asylum seekers. That's another stage again, which is very much linked in with the withdrawal of asylum. So what we're seeing here is effectively what you could call a stratification of rights and a denial of human rights beyond simply border governance. I think border governance is almost an earlier stage, and unfortunately I think we have progressed to another stage of the actual withdrawal of rights. So you can see that as treating people as being less than human, and certainly less than recipients of rights or holders of rights. And I think we should also think about what has developed in that direction. What we do as academics, I think, is a big question, because we are speaking here in today's webinar as kind of a bit in a bubble. And I think it's not easy to work out how we can become more involved. But I think we have to move outside of academic circles, and we certainly have to be part of far more activist groups, whether we be part of activist groups already as academics, or we need to get more involved with them. How effective that would be, I don't know, but I do think we need to get more involved with various activist groups to contest the direction in which this, you could call it border plus governance, has gone. So that's all I wanted to say, because I think we've got a lot to discuss and I want to leave time. But again, just my final words is really huge congratulations. And thanks very much, Kasia, for giving me a copy of the book, which I've been reading with great pleasure. And I hope that makes a real mark in the scholarship on the issue of race and racialization and racism.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Eleanor, for your kind words and for your for the points you made. I want to open up now. I know, Ignacy, you have your hand up, so please, other people, put your hand up if you have a digital hand, or just raise your hand, or make a note in the chat that you would like to speak. We still have got 25 minutes. So Ignacy, please, you can start.
Thank you. It's a kind of a very short advocem to what Eleonora has just said. Please do not refer to our chapter as Ignacy's chapter. I'm one of the 5 authors, so it's...
Apologies for that. Ignacy and et al.
Yeah, or just fifth chapter or the Roma-related chapter. It's also one of the challenges, not necessarily limited to migration studies, but this knowledge co-production on the side of the authors, but also trying to be more inclusive towards our research partners. And since I'm already speaking, very brief remark to you and Ivan said about Ukraine, because it also brings back to what I've said before about the migration processes and diversity of migration within Central and Eastern Europe. And at the very beginning of the full-scale war in Ukraine, there was about 100,000 non-Ukrainian citizens fleeing the country, and these were mostly migrants, refugees, international students from African and South American countries. It was a big issue at the very beginning. Then it kind of got silent, but it added a lot to our understanding of Central and Eastern Europeanness, Ukrainianness, Polishness, and so on. And then, and on top of that, you still have this Central and Eastern Europe in so-called traditional ethnic and cultural diversity, which we reflect in our chapter, about Polish Roma migrating from Poland, and now Ukrainian Roma leaving Ukraine, and among the citizens of when we speak about Ukraine, there is no simple distinction between Roma and Ukrainians, Roma other Ukrainians, because there can be Crimean Tatars among the Ukrainian migrants in Europe, or other possible ethnic groups which are there. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments, so we can sort of continue the conversation, or questions to the authors from the audience, or from authors to authors, etc.? Oh, Hannah, thank you. Hannah, actually, I wasn't sure if you would come, but if you want to say anything, Hannah, I would. Oh, maybe Hannah has gone already. She made a comment in the chat. I see Daria.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I had maybe a question to Eleanor about the border governance, because my understanding of border governance is when the right to seek asylum is being suspended, it's part of border governance. So I was wondering, what is your understanding of border governance, and could you talk a bit more about border governance being separated from citizenship and the larger border regime? And why would you think that border governance is the first step yeah. Thank you.
Yes, you are right in the sense that border governance is about stratifying who can come in and under what conditions. But I think what we've seen let's say, in recent years, is that in a sense, the refusal to allow somebody to apply for asylum at all, which is what I gather has happened in Poland, is taking it, maybe it's not border governance, but let's say it's taking border governance to another level. Maybe I should say that. I don't know if you'd agree with that, because, in a sense, you can make it difficult for someone to come in. And so, for example, you have large numbers of irregular migrants in European states, but it's also, in this case, it's actually, well, I suppose not allowing people to apply has been happening for a long time. If you think in the Italian case, where people just are simply thrown back and not allowed to apply. But I think what's happening here is that this form of governance is being inscribed into law virtually. I'm thinking here of what's happened in the UK and what you said is happening in Poland. That's what I think. Maybe what we should. You're right to pick me up on being a bit sloppy here, is to say that it's being intensified and hardened, you could say, the border governance. But it is certainly part of the regime of border governance. I don't know if you'd agree with me there.
Any other comments, questions? Yes, Olga.
Yes, hello. I'm sorry, I wasn't planning to raise a question, but then there is no line, so I decided that I would. And congratulations on the book. When I was in contact with Kasia, I said that I already looked through it, so I also think that it's a very important contribution. And I hope you can hear me well, because yeah. But my question is a bit about it's a bit of a probably dumb question, but what we understand today as Central and Eastern Europe, because from how you presented, these geographies, and then, like there were some kind of remarks that made me think a bit, because from the book, I get this impression that nowadays the Central and Eastern Europe stops at the border with Belarus. And then also what Daria said about Central and Eastern Europe being this primary Europe through its border regimes. But then there are countries behind these borders that, that are they still, like Moldova, Belarus, and to some extent Ukraine, are they still part of Central and Eastern Europe? I understand, of course, that you also you understand that it's not like, I don't know the whole discussion about what Central and Eastern Europe is, but I think with the war in Ukraine, there is also this contestation who belongs and who does not belong now to primary Europe, which is Central and Eastern Europe. And this is also the reflections that I have from the presentation and from the book, like outline generally. Yeah, but thank you very much again. It's a great work, I think.
Thank you for your comment. Yeah, we had a lot of discussion within the group about our calling of the region. So some authors talk about Eastern Europe, some talk about Central and Eastern Europe, which we settled for. I think, Ivan, in your book, you talk about Central Eastern Europe, so not the and there. And these things are, you can think that in the broader sort of context of what we're speaking about, these are small things, where the two, how to exactly call it, but it's actually quite important. And then we couldn't quite agree. And of course, there will always be these tensions of what to call it and where the region begins and where it ends. And also this is shifting and it's dynamic all the time. I think there is some broad agreement of sort of what is the semi-periphery of Europe. But again, like now you were pointing out how that's shifting. So if anybody else wants to add to that, please feel free to, and just unmute yourself and speak if you feel encouraged to. Otherwise, I think we have a question in the chat. I'm happy to read it out. It's written by Farida. Thank you very much for the presentations and congratulations on this well-needed book. How is the racialization of Roma in their home countries or among homeland communities transformed through migration? Does the process of othering involve different forms of racialization? This applies both to Roma who migrate to other countries and to Roma who stay put in their homeland, but migrants, i.e. Asian migrants, arriving from abroad. Has the nature of their racialization changed in any way? Would anybody be keen to answer this question?
I think I'm obliged to, or at least designated, but give me 20 seconds to think about the question and read it through. Well, This is more or less what our chapter is about, even though it's very brief. And like if we consider, if we take Poland, well, the Polish the Roma communities in Poland are not as numerous as in other countries in the region, like Ukraine, Slovakia, Hungary, or Romania. So unlike Slovakia or Hungary, the Roma issue is not as politicized and not as much on the public agenda as in other countries. But regarding the racialization, like very often the same derogatory or slur names used to call the migrants of non-European origin can be applied to the Roma people, and so this is one thing, one phenomenon we can mention, and of course, like among the Roma who who live in Poland, like any other Polish citizens, they do have some sort of interactions with the migrants, especially in the services, but for the moment, I cannot share any deeper thoughts or observations related to Roma people in Poland going to kebab places or to Asian beauty parlors. And yeah, Kamila, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think I would like to maybe raise two issues here. In our ethnographic work that started in 2016, we observed, particularly during the crisis, for instance, talking about COVID pandemic, we observed how racializations worked in Poland among people and transnational families of Polish Roma who lived across Poland, Germany, and the UK, for instance, and how, for instance, the fear of the virus was, which was pretty much universal in general for every member of the community, was actually doubled up by this minority fear of being seen as Roma and therefore not complying with the rules, being negligent, or breaking the rules, and how people we talked with took extra care not to be seen as rule breakers, not to be seen as those who are not contributing to the general efforts of COVID, of restricting themselves during COVID. And so that was like very practical thing, like how racialization worked in this particularly challenging times. And then continuing this line of thought of fear, of this minority fear, very early days of full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And then when we heard about Ukrainian Roma arriving to Poland, then we also were talking to our research participants in Poland, the Polish Roma. Many of them were also very much afraid of what is happening, observing that Roma are fleeing Ukraine, thinking that, okay, if they are fleeing Ukraine and even the considered safe regions like western part of Ukraine, that means that they are really afraid. That means that this is justified. And that means that we also may be affected. So something that is very particularly relevant for the minority communities, minorities who experience stigmatization and state violence in the recent past. And we are talking about the state violence in Poland, and something that resonates across the countries, the experience of Roma in many different countries, that kind of connects them and inform their actions and the way of thinking. Something that me as a member of the majority community, I'm not able to even relate on emotional level, yes, but I'm not able to really understand where it comes from. I'm not a member of the minoritized community. So that's something that I think is really relevant to when we think about minorities living through crisis, and I think we are continuously living through crisis, through COVID, through full-scale war, and somehow we are all affected, but some of us are more than others. Thank you.
Thanks, Camila. So we have a question from Daria Klingenberg. Would you like, you wrote it in the chat, but would you like to just share your thoughts? And then I saw it as well after.
Yeah, maybe. Thank you. I try to be very brief. I'm first of all I want to thank you for this really nice, wonderful piece of academic work, and for your discussion, from which I already learned a lot. And I'm mentally or intellectually hung up on the question of solidarity and the question what would be transversal points for various Central and Eastern European migrant communities and people that are based in Central Eastern European countries, if there's a possibility to think about something like transversal moments where collective policy or political action would be possible. And this comes from thinking about the German landscape of political activism, where there is some activism that is centered around second and third generation migrants that grew up in Germany and that try to come to terms with their position within the German migration society, and start to think about racialization through these terms. And then there are obviously lots of transnational solidarity work after the full-scale Russian invasion. There's border solidarity work, but still it's kind of limited, and the racialization of Central and Eastern Europeans, or the way race works there, is rarely politicized. And I just wonder about your thoughts, or your observations about where and how talking about the way race operates in Eastern European context and in Western Europe is successfully politicized. Sorry, now I became long. I wanted to be brief, but it's a complicated issue.
Thank you so much, Daria. While we ponder on that, could we take a question from Elisa and Ivan as well?
Hi, thanks. It's partly a question, but I wanted to jump into the conversation on the racialization of Roma. From the perspective of my research in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it's a bit of a change of region from what we've been talking about, but maybe it. I'm curious if other people have seen similar things. So, the people that the non-Roma people I talk to, in the context of a community on the border, Bihać, some people know, a community on the border that was really being overrun by migrants and refugees. After talking about them as racially different, as a kind of new thing for them, that they weren't used to thinking about race because they never had racism, because they never had Black people, this kind of talk. And then I would ask, what about the Roma? And the response was always to talk about, oh, well, that's an ethnic difference, a cultural difference, a lifestyle difference. Even though, of course, the racialization of Roma in the former Yugoslavia has been well documented and experienced by activists in Roma themselves. So I just wondered if that's something that resonates with people working in more northern places.
Thank you, Elisa. And then can we take Ivan's question/comment, maybe?
It's on a different topic, so I don't know if you want someone to answer this. Elisa's.
Well, so there's Daria's question, Elisa's question, then maybe we can hear from you, and then we have about 5 minutes, so if anybody wants to.
Well, okay, so actually I don't have a question, just a comment on Daria Klingenberg's intervention there, that I was very happy to participate in Berlin quite recently on a conference that was organized by Yanis Panayotidis and Alex Levitsky and others, and was actually sponsored and put on by the German Anti-Discrimination Office. And the topic was racism against Eastern Europeans. So at least at that moment, the German government recognized racism against Eastern Europeans as an issue that needs to be looked at.
Anybody wants to respond to Elisa or further to Daria or any other comments? Anna Safuta, yes.
I don't know whether like it's only a modest contribution. I'm not sure that I'm answering the Darius question, which is very multi-directional and covers a lot of ground and different challenges. But I know from the research on trade union organizing of so-called transnationally mobile workers that organizing by trade unionists, recruitment by Western trade unions of migrants works best when it is done in the language of those one tries to organize and recruit. So I guess that from this, we could draw the conclusion that solidarity works best when it's fluid. So it's based on one of those two poles or on both poles at the same time. And by poles, I mean an experience of labor exploitation, so a material experience of not whatever class you had at home or how you were placed on the class ladder in your country of origin, but your experience of exploitative working relationship in wherever country you migrated to, and shared experiences of racialization by from Western hegemonic whiteness. And this is when I was talking about that I would like to see more solidarity between racialized Eastern Europeans and, for example, Swana migrants from the Swana region. This is what I meant, a common solidarity based on this experience of racialization. Yeah, so those two poles, either simultaneously or separately, rather than a kind of like a smaller, more restrained solidarity on the basis of, you know, how far your country of origin came in its aspiration to whiteness or to Westernness, catching up with the West.
I just wanted to say a brief thing on because so many of you talked about you know, what is happening in Central Eastern Europe, and many talked about Poland, the elections, and of course the border violence. And I think Daria and others talked about how, you know, the sort of that central violence sort of moving to that space, right? The sort of Poland or Central Eastern Europe becoming the sort of the core of that racial violence. It's there where it's happening. And at the same time, being in the UK and attending various migration events, when I mentioned the Poland-Belarus border, the violence, the deaths, I find that at least here, and you know, many of you reside in countries across Western Europe, it's not really something people A, know about that much, and B, are very invested in. And that seems to be, you know, that's like a key thing. If they don't know or they're not invested in it, then how do we build those solidarities that really do need to be across? So I still feel like there is that kind of gap where we're also invested in this because we're all following what happens. And so that is kind of maybe then our bubble, but then you step literally out of the door here and it's not really a thing. So that's, I just find it concerning and really a big challenge for us. Yes, Daria.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on Daria's question, and I just wanted to mention liberal forms of racism as well. And I see that a lot in my field work. And I also think a lot about questions of solidarity, but then I think it's a rather sad kind of answer that I received to this question because I see the desire of kind of proving oneself as a European, as deserving, as belonging to Europe. And I think part of this project is the need to kind of, it's not really the need, but somehow people quite often succumb and embrace border violence, and they normalize the idea of EU having the right and EU member states having the right to deport and expel people, and kind of by creating this undeserving other who is often racialized as non-white, many white East Europeans get this kind of opportunity to prove themselves as true Europeans. But I think that what is interesting here to me is that it doesn't often happen through this like illiberal forms of racism, so this kind of explicitly like fascist forms, but also through this kind of normalization of the border regime, that this is a just project, and of course not everybody should be allowed to the EU. So I think when we talk about solidarity, it's important to think about these kind of more benevolent and kind of less violent forms of racism, so to say, but that yet normalize the violence that we see across the EU borders and also within Europe itself.
Thanks so much, Darian. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, but we've been going for 2 hours, so we should finish probably on time. And I hope we stay connected to each other. I've saved the chat, and the recording will be up on the social policy SPRC's website. Sorry, Eleanor, not remembering the full name now. And I will share the recording with you. So I'm just trying to stop the recording. Yeah, I'm not sure how to stop the recording, but once we leave, it will stop itself. So thank you again, everyone, for coming and having giving us very stimulating thoughts, and please stay in touch.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.